Centuries before supermarkets, native communities grew vegetables so resilient they still survive today. But if these plants outlasted empires, what makes them too extraordinary to ignore now? Most people walk right past groundnut vines without a second glance. They're twisting around trees and sprawling along riverbanks from Canada down to Florida, looking like any other wild plant. But underneath, that's where the magic happens. Native Americans knew this secret thousands of years ago. They'd dig up chains of potato-like tubers connected by underground stems, sometimes finding strings of them stretching several feet long. One good plant could feed a family for days. The Pilgrims learned this trick during their first brutal winter when regular crops failed miserably. Here's what makes groundnuts special. They pack about 3 times more protein than regular potatoes. We're talking 15-17% protein content, which is pretty impressive for something that grows wild. Plus, they taste nutty and slightly sweet when roasted. Nothing like the bland starch you might expect. The weird part is how easy these things are to grow. Groundnuts actually improve soil quality by fixing nitrogen from the air, just like beans do. They climb up whatever support they can find, producing fragrant purple flowers that smell like grape soda. Then there's the underground treasure hunt when harvest time comes around. Early colonists called them Indian potatoes and relied on them heavily when wheat crops failed. Some settlements probably wouldn't have survived without these protein-packed tubers. Yet, somehow, over the centuries, we completely forgot about them. Most gardeners today have never even heard of groundnuts, despite them being native to their own backyards. Growing them is ridiculously simple. Plant a few tubers in spring near something they can climb, a fence, trellis, or even corn stalks. They prefer moist soil, but aren't picky. By fall, you'll have a whole network of new tubers ready to dig up. The plants are perennial too, so they keep producing year after year. What's really fascinating is how many of these forgotten foods are still growing wild around us, just waiting to be rediscovered. Groundnuts are just the beginning. There's another overlooked native plant that early settlers confused with artichokes from Jerusalem, even though it had nothing to do with either Jerusalem or artichokes. If the groundnut was nature's protein powerhouse, then the Jerusalem artichoke decided to be the confusing cousin with an identity crisis. First things first, it's not from Jerusalem, and it's definitely not an artichoke. This knobby little root is actually a sunflower relative that someone clearly had fun naming back in the day. Native American tribes weren't bothered by the confusing name situation. They just called it what it was: good food. These folks figured out that sunchokes could be stored through brutal winters and roasted up into something that tasted like a cross between a potato and a sweet nut. Smart move, considering most other fresh foods disappeared when the snow started flying. But here's where things get interesting from a health angle. Jerusalem artichokes are loaded with something called inulin, which sounds fancy, but basically means your gut bacteria throw a party every time you eat them. This fiber doesn't just help digestion, it feeds the good microbes living in your intestines, keeping your whole system running smoother. The weird part is how tough these things are. While your precious tomatoes are wilting in drought or turning to mush after the first frost, sunchokes just keep growing like nothing happened. They're basically the honey badger of root vegetables. They don't care about your weather problems. You'd think something this resilient and nutritious would be everywhere, right? Wrong. Walk into any grocery store today, and you'll be lucky to find them hiding in some forgotten corner of the produce section. Most people have never even heard of them, let alone tasted one. They still grow wild across much of North America, popping up along roadsides and in abandoned lots like edible weeds. Some gardeners grow them, though they quickly learn these plants spread aggressively. Plant a few, get a patch that tries to take over your yard. Yet for all their toughness and nutrition, sunchokes remain one of those foods that somehow slipped through the cracks of modern eating. Speaking of foods that slipped away, there's another root that was once so important, it shaped entire landscapes. Most people think of blue camas as just another pretty wildflower, but for thousands of years, this humble purple bloom fed entire communities from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific coast. Native tribes didn't just stumble upon these bulbs, they turned camas harvesting into an art form. Here's where it gets interesting. Raw camas bulbs taste absolutely terrible. Bitter, starchy, and completely inedible. But indigenous communities figured out something amazing. They'd dig massive earth ovens, sometimes 6 feet deep, and slow cook these bulbs for days. The heat transformed those nasty starches into something sweet as molasses. The cooking process was no joke either. Women would layer the bulbs with wet grass and hot stones, then cover everything with dirt. For 2 to 3 days, steam would work its magic underground. When they finally opened those ovens, the bulbs had turned dark brown and incredibly sweet. Think natural candy that could keep you alive through winter. Families didn't just randomly pick camas wherever they found it. They managed specific meadows like gardens, passing down the best spots through generations. Some camas fields stayed in the same family for centuries. They'd burn the meadows regularly to keep competing plants away and make the camas' bulbs grow bigger and better. But here's the scary part. Camas has a deadly twin called death camas. Wrong choice, and you're done. Experienced harvesters could tell the difference instantly, but it took years to learn. The real camas has deep blue-purple flowers, while death camas' blooms are white or pale yellow. These bulbs packed serious nutritional punch, too. High in complex carbohydrates and fiber, they provided sustained energy through harsh winters. Tribes would harvest hundreds of pounds during peak season, then dry and store them in underground caches. Today, you'll still find blue camas blooming wild across the Pacific Northwest. The flowers support bees, butterflies, and other pollinators that our ecosystems desperately need. While most people walk right past these purple beauties, they're actually looking at one of North America's most important historical foods. Speaking of foods hiding in plain sight, wait until you hear about a squash that could survive winter better than most root vegetables. The Cherokee people knew something about patience. While other tribes were digging up roots or picking berries for quick meals, Cherokee farmers were perfecting something that would last through the harshest winters. They called it the candy roaster squash. And honestly, the name says it all. Picture a squash so sweet that roasting it fills your kitchen with the smell of natural candy. That's exactly what Cherokee families experienced every fall when they harvested these massive, colorful beauties from their gardens. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about taste. These squashes could sit in storage for months without spoiling, thanks to their incredibly thick skin that acted like natural armor. The Cherokee didn't grow their candy roasters alone either. They planted them alongside corn and beans in what we now call the Three Sisters system. Makes sense, right? The corn provided a natural trellis, the beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, and the squash spread out below, keeping weeds away with its broad leaves. It was like nature's own perfect farming plan, worked out over centuries. And the weird part is how versatile these squashes actually were. Sure, roasting brought out that signature sweetness, but Cherokee cooks also turned them into soups, stews, and even dessert pies. The bright orange flesh packed more vitamins than most vegetables available back then, especially vitamin A for eye health during those long, dark winter months. Then there's the storage factor that really sets candy roasters apart. While other fresh foods rotted away, families could count on these squashes lasting well into spring. Some could keep for 8 months or more if stored properly. That's serious food security. Today, you'd be lucky to find a true Cherokee candy roaster squash in any grocery store. Most people have never even heard of them, despite their incredible sweetness and storage abilities. A few dedicated gardeners are keeping the seeds alive, but these amazing squashes remain largely forgotten. Speaking of forgotten foods that kept families fed through tough times, there's another plant that shows up every spring in the eastern forests, carrying secrets that go way beyond simple nutrition. Spring arrives in the eastern woodlands, and something magical happens. Wild ramps push through the forest floor like nature's own wake-up call. These aren't your grocery store onions. There's something far more interesting. Native Americans knew exactly what they were doing when they searched for these beauties every March and April. After months of dried corn, stored squash, and whatever protein they could find, fresh greens meant survival. But ramps, they were the jackpot. Here's the thing about ramps that makes them special. They pack more vitamin C than most citrus fruits. During those long winters when scurvy could kill you, finding a patch of wild ramps was like discovering buried treasure. The leaves are broad and green, almost like tiny lily pads sprouting from the ground. Underground, white bulbs hide with purple stems that taste like garlic, and onions had a party. Indigenous foragers harvested both parts carefully. Leaves got picked first, while bulbs were saved for later in the season. Smart move, really. Take everything at once and you'd have no ramps next year. These plants need time to rebuild their energy stores underground. The flavor hits different than anything you'll find in stores. Imagine the strongest garlic you've ever tasted, mixed with the sharpness of a good onion, then multiply that by 3. Some folks say ramps are so potent they can smell them on your breath for days. Teachers in Appalachian schools used to send kids home during ramp season because the whole classroom reeked. Wild ramps still grow throughout eastern North America, from Canada down to the Carolinas. They love rich, moist soil under hardwood trees. Maple and oak forests are perfect hunting grounds. But here's where things get tricky. Ramps take up to 7 years to mature from seed. Overharvesting has wiped out entire patches. Today, some farmers cultivate ramps, but most wild populations need protection. Take only what you need, leave the bulbs, and never harvest more than 1/3 of any patch. Speaking of ancient foods that pack serious nutrition, there's another forgotten plant that fed entire civilizations. Most people think amaranth is some trendy superfood that appeared in health stores yesterday. Wrong. This little plant has been feeding people for over 8,000 years, and honestly, it's about time we paid attention again. Native Americans weren't messing around when they grew amaranth. They used every single part of this plant. The leaves, cooked them like spinach, packed with more iron than Popeye ever dreamed of. The seeds, ground into flour, mixed into gruels, or popped like tiny popcorn kernels for snacks. Here's where it gets interesting. Amaranth seeds contain all 9 essential amino acids. That makes it a complete protein, just like meat or eggs. Try finding that in your regular garden vegetables. Most plants can't pull off this trick, but amaranth does it naturally. The Aztecs called it huautli, and considered it so valuable they made sculptures out of amaranth dough during religious ceremonies. Spanish colonizers actually banned amaranth because they thought these ceremonies were too powerful. Imagine being so threatened by a plant that you outlaw it entirely. But here's the wild part. Amaranth practically grows itself. No fussy soil requirements, handles drought better than most crops, and produces thousands of seeds per plant. One plant can yield up to a pound of grain. Not bad for something the size of a small bush. The leaves taste like mild spinach with a slightly earthy flavor. Young leaves work great in salads, while older ones are perfect for cooking. The seeds have this nutty, almost peppery taste that adds crunch to everything from breakfast cereals to soups. Then there's the nutrition angle. Beyond that complete protein, amaranth delivers calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. Ancient people knew they were onto something good, even without nutrition labels. Growing amaranth today feels almost rebellious. While everyone else plants the same vegetables, you're cultivating something that fed entire civilizations. Seeds are easy to find online, and the plant tolerates poor soil better than most weeds. Speaking of plants that thrive where others struggle, wait until you hear about the climbing beans that revolutionized how Native Americans thought about farming. While amaranth was feeding families with its protein-packed seeds, another crop was quietly revolutionizing how people thought about farming. Native American pole beans didn't just grow food, they grew smart. These weren't your typical garden beans sprawled across the ground. Cherokee varieties and their cousins shot straight up corn stalks like natural climbers, turning every cornfield into a 3-dimensional feast. The corn provided the ladder, the beans grabbed on tight, and together they created something neither could achieve alone. But here's where it gets interesting. These beans came in colors that would make a rainbow jealous: deep purples, speckled reds, creamy whites, and mottled browns. Each variety brought its own personality to the pot. Some cooked up creamy and mild, others stayed firm with an earthy bite that made winter stews actually worth looking forward to. The real magic happened underground, though. While other plants were busy stealing nutrients from the soil, pole beans were secretly making deposits. They pulled nitrogen straight from the air and stuffed it into little nodules on their roots, basically creating fertilizer for free. Talk about a team player. Native farmers knew this long before science textbooks started explaining it. They'd plant different colored varieties together, mixing and matching like they were creating edible art. Purple beans might climb one cornstalk while speckled ones wound around another, creating fields that look more like gardens than farms. Then there's the genius of seed saving. Families would carefully select the best beans each harvest, keeping the strongest colors and flavors alive for next year's planting. No trips to the store, no fancy seed catalogs, just generations of careful selection that created varieties perfectly suited to local conditions. Each bean told a story through its color and shape. Some were bred for drying, others for eating fresh off the vine. The diversity was staggering, with hundreds of varieties adapted to different climates and tastes. These climbing champions prove that the best farming ideas often come from watching nature closely. Speaking of watching nature, there's another forgotten crop that took root observation to an entirely different level. You probably walk past dozens of root vegetables at the grocery store without giving them a second thought. But here's one you've definitely never seen on those shelves: Skirret. This forgotten gem was once as common in colonial gardens as carrots are today. Skirret produces clusters of sweet white roots that look like skinny parsnips had a family reunion underground. Native Americans and early settlers knew exactly what they had with this plant. The roots taste like a cross between carrots and sweet potatoes, with just enough starch to make you feel properly fed after a meal. What makes Skirret special isn't just its flavor. It's ridiculously high in fiber. We're talking way more than potatoes or parsnips could ever dream of delivering. Your digestive system basically throws a little party every time you eat these things. Plus, the plant keeps producing year after year without replanting, which sounds pretty convenient when you're trying to feed a family. But here's where things get weird. Skirret practically vanished from American gardens sometime in the 1800s. Nobody really knows why. Maybe people got distracted by flashier vegetables, or perhaps it was too easy to grow and didn't seem exciting anymore. Sometimes the best things just slip through the cracks of history. The ancestors would boil, roast, or mash these roots into hearty meals that kept them going through tough winters. They understood something we've forgotten: that reliable food doesn't have to be complicated or trendy. It just has to work. Today, you can still find Skirret seeds if you hunt around specialty catalogs. The plant loves cool, moist soil and basically takes care of itself once established. It's perfect for gardeners who want something different but don't want to babysit their vegetables all season long. Here's the thing about forgotten foods: they usually disappeared for reasons that don't make much sense anymore. While Skirret was quietly vanishing from gardens, another ancient crop was holding its ground in completely different terrain, waiting for modern gardeners to rediscover its tangy secrets. Most people have never heard of tomatillos, but these little green fruits wrapped in papery husks were feeding Native Americans thousands of years before tomatoes became popular. The Aztecs called them tomatal, which is actually where we get the word tomato from. Pretty backwards when you think about it. These tart, tangy fruits look like green tomatoes wearing little paper bags. But here's the thing: they're not tomatoes at all. They're more closely related to Cape gooseberries and ground cherries. The papery husk isn't just for show either. It protects the fruit and tells you when it's ready. When that husk starts splitting and the fruit fills it out completely, you've got yourself a perfect tomatillo. Native tribes grew them right alongside corn and beans in their Three Sisters gardens. Makes perfect sense when you realize tomatillos need sturdy support, and corn stalks work beautifully. The plants get bushy and heavy with fruit, sometimes producing dozens of tomatillos per plant. Then there's the nutrition angle that nobody talks about. These green gems pack more vitamin C than most citrus fruits. They're loaded with antioxidants, particularly ones that support your immune system. Ancient peoples didn't know about vitamins, but they definitely knew these fruits kept them healthy through tough seasons. The flavor is what really sets them apart, though. Raw tomatillos taste sharp and lemony with a hint of apple. Cook them down and they become mellow, almost sweet. Perfect for sauces, stews, and relishes that add life to bland winter foods. And the weird part is how easy they are to grow. Tomatillos practically take care of themselves once they get going. Few pests bother them, they handle drought better than tomatoes, and they keep producing until frost kills them. You need at least 2 plants for pollination, but that's hardly a problem when each one gives you pounds of fruit. Most gardeners today completely overlook these productive, nutritious plants. But if you're looking for something that actually produces food instead of just looking pretty, tomatillos deserve a spot in your garden. Speaking of overlooked crops that feed people reliably, there's another grain that most folks have never tasted despite growing wild across huge areas of North America. Wild rice isn't actually rice at all. It's the seed of an aquatic grass that grows in shallow lakes and slow-moving rivers across the upper Midwest. The Ojibwe called it manoomin, which translates to good berry. and they considered it so sacred that prophecy spoke of finding it in the place where food grows on water. For over 1,000 years, native tribes have harvested wild rice the same way. Two people paddle a canoe through the rice beds in late summer. One person pulls the canoe forward, while the other uses wooden sticks called knockers to bend the tall grass over the canoe and gently tap the ripe seeds loose. The seeds that don't fall into the canoe drop back into the water, ensuring next year's crop. But here's what makes wild rice special beyond its history. This stuff is a nutritional powerhouse that puts regular rice to shame. Wild rice contains twice the protein of brown rice and is loaded with B vitamins, especially folate and niacin. It's also packed with fiber, magnesium, and antioxidants that give it that distinctive dark color. The flavor? Nothing like the bland white rice sitting in your pantry. Wild rice has a nutty, earthy taste with a chewy texture that holds up beautifully in soups, stuffings, and salads. It takes longer to cook than regular rice, but the payoff is worth it. Then there's the environmental angle that grocery stores never mention. Wild rice beds create entire ecosystems. They filter water naturally, prevent erosion, and provide habitat for waterfowl, muskrats, and countless fish species. When you buy true wild rice, you're supporting these wetland habitats. The catch? Most wild rice in supermarkets is actually cultivated in flooded fields, not hand-harvested from natural lakes. Real wild rice costs more because it's still gathered by hand, one canoe at a time. The labor is intense, the season is short, and the yields vary with weather conditions. Finding authentic hand-harvested wild rice means seeking out Native American cooperatives or specialty food suppliers who work directly with traditional harvesters. This forgotten tradition connects us to sustainable food systems our ancestors understood perfectly, and we're just rediscovering.